Welcome everyone to Fundamentals of Kabbalah and Chassidut, continuing with our series, The Wandering Jew, Mystical Musings and Inspirational Insights from Rav Yitzchak Ginsburgh. We left off last week learning different beautiful insights about Torah. And we will be continuing tonight. So here we go. For those who have the book, we're on page 118 at the bottom. It's called Your Portion in Torah. So Rav Ginsburgh says, in the daily prayers, we beseech the Almighty. May the Holy Temple be built speedily in our days and give us our portion in your Torah. In other words, there are many people who say this every day. Some people sing it. Yibanei Hamikdash, Yibanei Hamikdash, Yibanei Hamikdash. No, I'm singing a different nigun altogether. Let me think if I can think of it. V'ten chelkeinu b'toratecha, Yibanei Hamikdash, Yibanei Hamikdash, Yibanei Hamikdash, V'ten chelkeinu b'toratecha. That was terrible, but anyways, that is what it is. May the Holy Temple be built speedily in our days and give us our portion in your Torah. So Rav Ginsburgh asks the question, what is the connection between building the temple and being given your portion in the Torah? In other words, why are these two things put together? So he answers, the offerings brought to God in the temple, which at present are substituted by our prayers. We no longer have a temple, but the temple service was morphed or translated into our daily prayers. So he says that the offerings that we used to bring God in the temple, but are now our prayers, they ascend to the origin of the Torah in God's infinite light. They then descend back to each one of our souls as a revelation of our personal portion of the Torah. Now, let's explain this, because it's really a very deep idea. Building the temple is a mitzvah in the Torah. Originally, it was building the tabernacle, the Mishkan. There's actually 5 Torah portions dedicated to the building of the Mishkan. And then a good part of the book of Vayikra, Leviticus, that tells us about the service in the temple. So obviously, it's a very big matter. But Rav Ginsburgh is just pointing out the whole idea of the temple and the tabernacle is part of the Torah. So he's saying, when we say in this saying, may our holy temple be rebuilt, he says what happens when we pray a prayer like that, then I'll read his words again. These words ascend to the origin of the Torah in God's infinite light. They then descend back to each one of our souls as a revelation of our personal portion of the Torah. So in other words, one of the ways that the temple is referred to, and this is a perfect thing to be talking about this because tomorrow night is Tisha B'Av, where more than perhaps any day of the year, we remember the reality of the temple and the calamity when it was destroyed. And so one of the ways we refer to it, and I believe the Rambam almost prefers this way, is Beit HaBechira. the chosen house. That's how we usually translate it. Beit HaBechira, the house that was chosen by God to be the place where he would have his Shekhinah dwell. But it's explained in Chassidut that it doesn't just mean the place that God chose. What it meant, the experience, is when we would go to the temple, we would be strengthened in the ability to use our free choice to make the right decisions, to make good decisions. So in other words, it's called the house of choice, not just God's choice, but it strengthens our ability to use our God-given Bechira Chafshit, free will, free choice. So in other words, so when we're praying for the temple or doing the service of the temple. So Rav Ginsburgh says it's actually based on the Zohar, where the secret of the offerings rise to the highest level of Keter. And so that's what he's saying, that that our prayer for the Beit HaMikdash rises up to the actual origin of the Torah, that is connected one with God. But then when it comes back to us, it strengthens our Bechira, and it gives us our portion in the Torah. Now, we should know that every Shabbat in the Amida, in the silent or standing prayer, there are no requests on Shabbat. The regular Amida is 3 blessings in the beginning, 3 at the end, to acknowledge and to praise God. And then there's 12/13 requests in the middle. On Shabbos, we have the same structure, 3 in the beginning and 3 in the end, but only 1 in the middle. And technically, it's not requesting anything. It's all about Shabbat, as we would expect on Shabbat. But part of that is when we say these exact words that some people say every day, V'tein chelkeinu b'toratecha. Please give us our portion in your Torah. And I have to say, on a personal level, that when I daven on Shabbos, I always try, at least, to really, really concentrate on those words. And the reason is, I'm just sharing with everyone from a deeply personal level. I'm a teacher. I write books. And for me, requesting my portion in the Torah is my very being. I hope everyone can understand it. It's not like anyone else can't have the same request. So I'm just sharing from my perspective, because I'm at least trying to teach Torah all the time. In order to teach Torah, you have to learn Torah all the time. And then I do my best to write about it and put it into print so it has some kind of eternal value to it and will last, Bezrat Hashem. And so for me to request and to feel that I am receiving my portion in the Torah is incredibly important to me personally. But it can be to everyone. And it should be to everyone. Why? Because everyone has a portion in the Torah. Shivim panim l'Torah. We're told there's 70 faces to the Torah. The Arizal said there are 600,000 faces to the Torah. Why? Because that's how many letters there are in the Torah. So, as always, here, Rav Ginsburgh, in very, very few words, has given over to us a very, very deep concept. And I just want to repeat something I said, because it says in the Zohar that we're on page 118 and the beginning of 119. The Zohar says that the secret of the offerings in the temple reached the highest level of Keter. So what does that mean to us? Well, as we just learned, all the offerings are now replaced by our prayers. So it means potentially our prayers, and here I'm not talking about just about requesting things from God. I'm talking about the whole spiritual practice of connecting to God in a prayerful manner. That is what prayer is about. Some prayers are requests, for sure, but there's many types of prayer. But it's coming from, it reaches the highest place of God. And then we have to hope that what comes back to us here, according to this Torah, is our portion in the Torah. That's the biggest blessing in the world, is one can keep the mitzvot, but it doesn't necessarily mean that we have the feeling that we're totally grasping what these mitzvahs are that we're doing, especially when we do it without much thought or joy or intention. So that's what we'll get back. But when we put great effort into doing mitzvah with our full power, our full energy, then we are connected to our portion in the Torah. Okay, now we're continuing on page 119, where it's called Waving the Torah Flag. So Rav Ginsburgh says, after receiving the Torah at Mount Sinai, each tribe received an individual banner. So let me explain this. If you go to the book of Bamidbar, the first parsha of Bamidbar talks about the encampment in the desert, how the 12 tribes camped, in what order, 3 on each side, and each of the tribes had a banner. And the story of the banners is, there's a midrash that says that when God came to give the Torah at Sinai, first angels came and they placed crowns on our heads, 2 crowns, one for Naaseh and one for Nishma, one for we will do, and the other one for we will hear. And they also came with flags. And the Midrash says the Jewish people saw these flags and they were so enamored by these flags, they said, we also would like to have flags. And God said, great idea. I'll give each of the tribes a flag. That's what the Midrash says. So the question is, what was it about these flags that turned the people on so much? What caught their fancy? So I believe it was the Slonomer Rebbe who said an angel is, in a certain way, is defined by their task. their purpose, their mission. And each angel in the moment is completely identified with its task. And so when the people saw the the angels with the banners, they understood that their task was to give us the crowns and to be representatives of God at the giving of the Torah. And what turned them on was a sense of purpose. A sense of purpose. So that's the background to what Rav Ginsburgh is going to give over to here. So I'll start again. After receiving the Torah at Mount Sinai, each tribe received an individual banner. But our national flag, the flag of our people as a whole, is the Torah. Now, there wasn't a special flag with a picture of the Torah on it. So he's talking symbolically. The tribes did have flags, and they had symbols on them that we still refer to. And they had a certain color to them that we refer to. But here he's saying our national flag, that is the flag of the Torah. So he says like this: always keep the Torah in hand and wave it back and forth. So again, he's talking symbolically here. If, in other words, the banner represents our identity, our purpose. So he says, since the banner of all of Israel is the Torah, then we should wave it back and forth with Jewish pride. Now listen what he says. As an individual, you should feel humble and lowly. But as part of a people to whom God bestowed the Torah, you should feel great. So this is an amazing statement, because we know that in general, pride is not considered a great midah, a great characteristic. In fact, the Gemara talks a lot about pride and ego and the negativity of having undue pride. But here, Rav Ginsburgh is saying our acceptance of the Torah, our waving the Torah as our flag, as an individual, we should feel humble. But as a nation, there's nothing wrong with feeling pride and, as he says, feeling great. So now he continues. The root of the word flag, in Hebrew, it's degel, permutes to spell the root of the word great. Now, there's the same letters as degel, in a different order, spells gadol, great. That's what he's basing this on. It also permutes to spell the root of daleg, to jump, to skip. By waving our flag of truth, we skip from individual lowliness to collective greatness. It's a very, very fundamental idea, especially today, where Jewish individuals and communities are being challenged with our Jewish identity. People are afraid to have mezuzahs on their door, to wear a kippah, to wear a Magen David, to be outwardly identified as being Jewish. And unfortunately, there's a reality. There are certain places where, to be honest, it would be dangerous to wear a kippah in certain neighborhoods these days. You'd be taking your life in your hands. So how do we deal with this? On the other hand, we need to stand up and not be afraid of who we are. So on an individual level, we have to be careful. But here it's more of a spiritual idea of being humble. That the fact that God gave us the Torah and entrusted me to live by it, I should accept that in a very humble way. But at the same time, I'm part of a people that has a mission to spread the Torah to the whole world. So I have to be able to express a certain level of pride. This is a bit tricky. It's not so simple in all circumstances how to do this. But here, Rav Ginsburgh is saying we should never be, let's say, embarrassed or overly afraid to identify Jewishly. Like I said, we have to be smart, we have to be careful. But ultimately, we do need to wave our flag of Torah without embarrassment. Okay, the next thing Rav Ginsburgh says, this is really a classic one. It's 3 short lines. He says, prayer is the service of the heart. Torah of the mind, meaning the service of the mind, and charity is the service of the hands. Prayer brings rain. Torah advances peace, and charity hurries the redemption. Now, Rav Ginsburgh is basing this whole thing on various sources. In the Torah, it says that we should serve God with our hearts. And the sages ask, because it doesn't explain what does that mean? How does one serve God with their heart? So the sages ask, what is the service of the heart? And they answer in one word, prayer. Prayer is the epitome of the service of the heart. And it's very interesting that especially for those who were with us on Sunday, when we learned the parsha of the Et Hanan, the whole story of Moshe praying 515 prayers to come into the land of Israel. Anyone who did not hear that or get to see that video, I highly recommend it, because it's talking about the depths of what is prayer. Where does prayer take us? How do we approach prayer? What's the inner meaning of prayer? So I'm not going to go into that now. Everyone is welcome to watch the video. So if prayer is the service of the heart, Rav Ginsburgh says Torah is the service of the mind. In other words, how do we serve God with our mind? Through learning Torah. As simple as it is. by employing our full faculties, our full intellectual faculties, not exclusively. It doesn't say exclusively, but here we're saying the ultimate service of the mind is learning Torah. And I would say everyone who learns Torah knows that that's true. If one doesn't have that experience, then it might seem a little foreign. But the ultimate experience of employing the mind, of directing the mind and getting the most out of the mind is through Torah study. And the last thing he says, and what is the service that the service of the hands is charity. The hands represent action, all action. But here it's saying, so what's the service of the hands? Is helping others. Not just money, time and effort and money. That is the service of the hands, to do, to act, to reach out. And then he says, again, all of these are based on other teachings in the Torah or of the sages, that prayer brings rain, that this goes all the way back to Gan Eden, where it says in the Torah counter creation, greenery, vegetation was created on the third day. And in the second telling of the account of creation, it says that nothing had grown yet because there was no man to pray for, and this is along with Rashi, was saying that even though vegetation was created in the third day, it was as if it was in potential, because nothing can grow ultimately without rain, without being watered. And Rashi tells us an amazing thing. There was no human to pray for rain. So that's why I'm saying prayer brings rain. This is always back in the account of creation. And ever since then, we have this concept that we need to pray for rain. Rain, the word for rain in Hebrew is geshem, and the word for physicality is gashmiut. It's from the same root. So praying for rain, prayer brings rain, but prayer also brings livelihood, brings physicality to its fruition. And ultimately, charity hurries the redemption. There are many, many stories that are told in the Gemara and in later times of the connection of charity and we'll call it personal redemption. How individuals were redeemed from certain circumstances through the act of charity, meaning they're the ones giving the charity, and a certain problem or obstacle in their own lives was redeemed because of their reaching out and giving to others. And sometimes charity hurries redemption for the one receiving it. If someone is hungry and they receive either money or food, that hurries their personal redemption in the moment. In fact, there's a famous story in Masechet Ta'anit that there's a famous individual called Choni Amagel, Choni the circle maker. I'm not going to tell the whole story, but one time Israel needed rain. It wasn't coming. And he drew a circle around himself and said, God, I'm not moving from this circle until you bring rain. It was a bit controversial, but it worked. It worked. So his grandson, one time, there was a drought, and they came to him to ask him to pray for rain. And he was very, very humble. And so before they could even pray for rain, he and his wife went up on the roof and kind of like in secret prayed for rain, and clouds formed, and rain started to fall on the side of the house where the wife was. So later, they tried to hide this. They were very, very humble. And the sages said, okay, we know what you were doing. You can't fool us. But why did it start raining on your wife's side? So he said like this. He said, when I give charity, I give money. And that means the person could be like starving. He has to take the money and go into town and find a bakery or a restaurant or something, and maybe put in his order. And by the time he gets it, he's chalashing. My wife gives food. Immediately, she gives food. No waiting. So that's why the rain came on her side first. So that's just a very beautiful story, how charity hurries the redemption. Okay, now we're turning to page 120. Up to now, last week and this week was a section just called the Torah. Now we're starting a new section called the Torah's inner dimension. In other words, he's going to be talking more about deeper understandings, deeper levels. Now, the first thing he says, again, one sentence, but very, very deep. He says, from the Torah's revealed dimension, you learn how to feel like a child or servant of God. From the Torah's inner dimension, you learn how to feel like God's spouse. So obviously, this is talking about different relations that we have with God. We can feel like a child of God. We can feel like a servant of God. And these are not necessarily mutually exclusive. One can feel like a child and a servant at the same time. You have to remember, perhaps the greatest accolade that Moshe received is God called him an Eved Hashem, a servant of God. So when we're talking about servant, we're talking about in the most positive manner. But here it's saying that's from what's called the revealed Torah. But the inner dimension of the Torah, this teaches us how to feel like God's spouse. In other words, a much more intimate relationship. So obviously there's a lot to say about this, but I'm just going to leave it like that. That the idea of the inner dimensions of the Torah is to awaken within us this image, this feeling that we are married to God. We, of course, are the feminine, and God is the masculine. He's the Chatan, and we are the Kala. Okay, the next one, still on page 120, it's called Water and Honey. Torah is likened, obviously in different places, to water, milk, olive oil, and honey. Meaning in different sayings of the sages, different verses from the prophets or the writings, where the Torah is compared to milk, olive oil, water, milk, olive oil, and honey. Each has a different viscosity, meaning a different degree of resistance to flowing. In other words, some things flow easy, and some flow slowly. Water has the lowest viscosity, which means it flows the fastest. Honey has the highest viscosity, which means it flows the slowest. I think these are obvious to everyone. Water symbolizes the Torah's revealed dimension, flowing quickly from its high origin to our low reality. Remember, the Torah, as we're saying, is compared to water. Water always flows from above to below. It always seeks to descend. And that is the whole idea of God taking the primordial Torah and bringing it down to earth. It's like water flowing. The honey of Torah refers to the sweet mysteries of divinity and creation. The speed with which it flows, it integrates into our consciousness, is slower. So he's just making a very interesting point here. Now, first of all, we'll call this a very general statement. He's trying to make a point here. Anyone who has studied Gemara knows how difficult it can be and how it sometimes does not feel like flowing water. You have to invest so much mental power to follow sometimes the Gemara logic. But he's just saying in general, you read the Parsha, you read the Chumash, you read, let's say, the halachas of how do you light the candles on Hanukkah? How do you make the blessing on bread? All of these things are pretty straightforward. The Gemara is an extreme example of learning Torah. When you learn halacha, you learn the words of the Tanakh, of the Bible, they flow like water. But when you get into the inner dimensions of the Torah, which are sweet like honey, it takes a lot of thought, a lot of integration to truly be able to understand the inner dimensions of the Torah. That doesn't make it bad, obviously. Everyone loves honey. And we don't I'm never having honey again because it takes too long for it to get from the spoon into the cup. I'm never having honey again. No, we wouldn't say that. We want the honey, but we have to accept that it's a slower process of integration. Okay, the next one, the bottom of page 120. It's called Redeeming Souls Then and Now. This is a great one. It's a very, very practical one, but it's very important. It says, the greatest mitzvah in the Torah is freeing someone from captivity. This has been expressed many, many, many times. It's hard to put a definition of what is the greatest mitzvah. Every mitzvah is great, but nonetheless, over the generations, we use the expression that redeeming captives is like the greatest mitzvah. We saw this with our hostages, that just people would not give up on them. The army wouldn't give up on them. The government, Jews around the world were praying for them, supporting the families, demonstrations, everything. And there's many stories of the Hasidic Rebbes who went around because they were identifiable as the Rebbes, collecting money to redeem captives. Because unfortunately, it was a very well-known practice for Jews to be taken as hostages in order to ransom them and make people rich. Unfortunately, it was a very big part of Jewish history. Rav Ginsburgh continues, in Hebrew, it is literally referred to as redeeming a soul, a pidyon nefesh, of redeeming a soul. Today, redeeming a soul means freeing someone who is caught in a false belief system. So here he's expanding the definition of who is a captive. Now, again, unfortunately, we just went through a very, very painful episode in our history of there were 250 hostages, and it took a number of years to get them all out. And not all of them made it out, unfortunately. But here, Rav Ginsburgh is saying, in our day, there are so many souls who are captive to false belief systems. So in other words, to redeem a soul today means to try to bring them under the wings of the Shekhinah, under the wings of the divine presence. So he continues, redeeming captives is different from what it used to be. It used to be about simply paying a ransom. Today it's done by spreading light, in particular, the light of Kabbalah and Chassidut. Now look what he says here, though. He says, but even today, there is a monetary ransom to pay. We need technology to spread the light, and it's not free, but a little goes a long way. So I'm sure you can understand this. I can't miss this opportunity to take what Rav Ginsburgh is saying to appeal to anyone watching this video to take it to heart. If you are benefiting from our videos, you should just know that there's a whole organization behind it that needs to live, needs to have financial foundation to be able to do what we're doing. So thank you, Rav Ginsburgh, for giving me this opportunity. But here, I'm just pointing out, here you have Rav Ginsburgh, who is, in my estimation, the greatest teacher of Kabbalah and Chassidut in our generation. There are others, but I believe he is the greatest or among the greatest. But he understands a certain reality also. You should know that Gal Einai is on every social media platform you can imagine. And they have whole staff of people sharing Rav Ginsburgh's Torah worldwide, daily, on all these different platforms. But it takes people to do it who have families, who need support. So the expression is, Hemevin Yavin. Those who understand will understand. Going forward on page 121. Kabbalah is the science of here again, here's another gem. Kabbalah is the science of creation, taking us behind the scenes and telling us it's the making of the story. In other words, Kabbalah is explaining, how does creation work? What's the story behind creation? What's creation all about? How did God make it happen? Sometimes we could call this Ma'aseh Bereshit, the workings of creation. But then he says like this, that's Kabbalah. Then he says, Chassidut is the portrait of the Creator who is unseen even behind the scenes. So here he says, Kabbalah is taking us behind the scenes and explaining, well, how did all of this happen? But Chassidut is not just interested in how this all happened, but it's interested in the one who made it happen. Not, of course, that Kabbalah isn't, and not that Torah isn't, but he's trying to teach us something here, that in Rav Ginsburgh's own words, Chassidut is a further development of Kabbalah. It's not like there's Kabbalah and there's Chassidut, and apples and oranges. Chassidut is 100, let's say 1,000% based on Kabbalistic ideas and principles. But it through the Baal Shem Tov, Chassidut created a new language that brings these teachings in a more inner way, in a more psychological way, in a way that human beings can understand it. If you try to learn the Zohar or the Arizal in its original, then you will not succeed unless you have a teacher and unless you have, and now things are different. You have whole sets of Zohar that explain sentence by sentence what it means on the inner level, but even so, the symbology, the language of Kabbalah is without the proper learning, you cannot grasp it. It's like a foreign language. But Chassidut took these very same ideas, and the Baal Shem Tov and obviously his students after him until this day have taken those ideas and reformulated them in a language that is more personally understandable. Okay, the next one on page 121, Rectifying Our Imagination. One of the objectives of studying Kabbalah is to rectify, broaden, and mature our associative powers of imagination. By learning Kabbalah, we witness unity. Okay, so this needs explanation. So first of all, we should know that probably the two main teachers who explained prophecy more than anyone was the Rambam and the Ramchal. Around approximately 500 years separating them. The Rambam and the Ramchal write extensively about prophecy, what it is, how it works, the whole thing. But one thing they both emphasize is that ultimately prophecy is connected to rectified imagination. This is a whole subject in itself, but when our imagination is clarified and purified, it can lead to prophecy. When our imagination is mired in physical desires and distractions, it could lead us to the pit of destruction. It can go either way. So that's why he says one of the objectives of studying Kabbalah is to rectify, broaden, and mature our associated powers of imagination. By learning Kabbalah, we witness unity. And in fact, and this is many of you have learned this with me before, but this is where we have to repeat it, is that the word for Kabbalah in its meaning of to receive. If you ask most people, what does the word Kabbalah mean? Well, it means to receive. But it also has another meaning, and that is to make correspondences. To make correspondences. In the Torah, the root word of Kabbalah appears 3 times, all in the sense of making correspondences, not in the sense of receiving. And what is that? Is in making the Mishkan, the tabernacle, where there were curtains, and then the curtains had to be put together to surround the Mishkan. And so each set of curtains had 50 loops. And then the Torah says that you take these golden clasps and you connect the 2 loops on all 50 of them, and that's how you put the curtains together. And then it says, V'haya hamishkan echad. And then the Mishkan becomes one. So in one of Rav Ginsburgh's most important teachings, he says, from this we learn that learning Kabbalah is the art and the sensitivity of seeing correspondences between different things, making connections in the Torah and in our lives. This happened to me, and this happened to me, and this happened to me. What's the connection? How do we connect the dots in our lives? And then the ultimate purpose of Kabbalah is when you can make more and more connections between things, then you see the unity of all creation. That's what it says. And then the Mishkan becomes one. That is the meaning. And again, the word for making these correspondences, putting these curtains together, is lahakbil. Lahakbil, the same root as Kabbalah. So Rav Ginsburgh continues, to recognize the symbolism as well as the synchronicity in the things that we see requires a high level of consciousness. Kabbalah helps us attain it. So again, this idea of how to connect the dots in our lives and the Torah that we learn. Synchronicity in our life experiences is a manifestation of divine providence. In other words, behind connecting the dots in our lives is divine providence. Even when we're making choices, because we have free will, but nonetheless, there's always call it the background of divine providence. God is constantly talking to us. Learn to understand his language. Meaning, how is he talking to us? Through the circumstances of our life. That is how God talks to us. So Rav Ginsburgh says, learn to understand his language. Look at what's happening in our lives, and then try to probe, okay, what is God telling me? And then what should I do about it? He continues, try to relate what you see and hear to the weekly Torah portion. God looks into the Torah and creates the world anew continuously. Now, this is a huge chiddush that Rav Ginsburgh is saying here. The first sentence, try to relate what you see and hear to the weekly Torah portion. This is something that the Alter Rebbe taught. It's a well-known concept. Everyone is encouraged always to look into the Parsha and upcoming events, meaning holidays, and then look at what's happening in your life and look what's happening in the world and start to see the connections. Anyone who does this, no one claims that everything happening in your life, you could say, oh, this in this Parsha. But it's almost uncanny how many times you can. That you read the Parsha and it's like, oh my gosh, that's exactly something that happened in my life today, yesterday, the day before, or something happening in the world. But here, Rav Ginsburgh adds a point that I really never heard before. He said, God looks into the Torah and creates the world anew continuously. In other words, we say, look into the Torah and see what's happening. It's called living with the times. The chayot im hazman, living with the times. But here, Rav Ginsburgh is adding, since we have this concept that, and we usually think about it in the past, the Zohar says that God looked into the Torah and created the world. The Torah being the blueprint of creation. So God looked into the Torah like a person looking at architectural plans and then builds a house according to the plans. But here Rav Ginsburgh is saying is that since God is creating the world at every split second, God is looking constantly in the Torah to create the world anew. So when we're looking at the Torah Parsha, it's not only that we start to see what is happening in the world, but there's a deep connection to this is where the divine providence is coming from. Where is it coming from that what's happening in the Parsha is happening in my life? It's coming from the fact that God is looking in the Torah now, and he's creating the world anew this week through Parshat Ve'etchanan. That's like a different dimension of understanding what it means to live with the times. In other words, in a certain way, the Torah is being, not only is the world being recreated all of the time, the Torah is being recreated all of the time. And of course, God's divine providence is always, it's not an automatic pilot. It's moment to moment. So that's a deep concept. That's a deep concept. Okay, I think this is as far as we can take it this week. Very important. There will be no class next week unless there's some kind of change in the world order. But according to the way things are supposed to happen, I will be traveling next week, so there'll be no Sunday and Tuesday class. I do want to take this opportunity that in the event that we do have to fast tomorrow night, according to the laws of nature, that is what is planned. Miracles, I suppose, can always happen. But I want to, everyone who's contemplating fasting, everyone should have an easy fast. People who, for whatever reason, are not going to fast, but still it's a time to be focused on really all of Jewish history and the rectifications that the world needs right now to bring redemption to the world. Even though Tisha B'Av is sometimes it's called the low point of the year. We're literally sitting on the ground reading the Book of Lamentations. It's like the low point of the year. But in a deep way, it's a time of redemption. Because according to tradition, Mashiach is born on Tisha B'Av. And from all of the tragedy will come redemption. From darkness will come light, and from bitter will come sweet.